You ever look at someone and realize they've been holding their breath for so long they forgot what breathing normally feels like? The question drifted through Elias Brooks' mind as he crossed the park with his daughter's small hand wrapped around two of his fingers. The evening air carried the soft smell of cut grass and lake water, and somewhere near the food carts, somebody was burning pretzels again. June sunlight stretched low across the sidewalks in long gold streaks, catching on bicycles, stroller wheels, and tired faces heading home from another Wednesday that had lasted too long. 6:14 p.m. That's what the old digital clock on the park entrance sign read when Elias spotted the little boy near the bench. The kid couldn't have been older than 7. Skinny shoulders, blue hoodie despite the heat, one sneaker untied. He sat cross-legged on the concrete beside a broken toy robot, carefully gathering loose pieces into his lap like they mattered more than they probably did. A silver arm rolled away across the pavement. The boy didn't chase it. 20 feet behind him stood a woman in a cream-colored pantsuit, phone pressed to her ear, eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the trees. "No, move the deposition to Friday," she said sharply. "I don't care what Greg promised them." Her voice had that polished edge Elias recognized immediately. Corporate. Controlled. The kind of voice people built after life stopped being gentle with them. Beside him, his daughter Naomi tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, nodding toward the robot. Elias saw it too. The cracked plastic chest plate. The missing wheel. The way the little boy's fingers hesitated before touching each broken piece, like he already expected things not to stay together. Elias let go of Naomi's hand slowly. "Stay where I can see you, all right?" She nodded, already skipping toward the swings nearby. Elias walked over without hurry. No performance. No charm. Just quiet footsteps against concrete. The little silver robot arm sat near his boot now. He bent down, picked it up carefully, then crouched beside the boy without crowding him. "Robots survive worse than this," he said softly. The kid finally looked up. Pale green eyes. Tired ones. Too tired for 7. For a second, neither of them spoke. Elias turned the loose robot arm in his hand, studying the snapped connector. "Cheap hinge," he murmured. "Happens all the time." Behind them, heels clicked fast across the pavement. "Ethan." The woman's voice sharpened instantly. Protective. Alert. Elias looked up as she stepped between them slightly, phone lowered now, but still glowing in her hand. Up close, she looked younger than he first thought. Maybe mid-30s. White blonde hair pulled into a rushed knot. Expensive watch. Exhaustion sitting beneath her makeup like bruised shadows. Her eyes moved over Elias in one quick sweep. Black man. Worn work boots. Faded navy maintenance uniform. Then down to her son. Then back again. "He's fine," she said automatically. Elias nodded once. "Calm. I figured." He held out the robot arm toward the boy instead of her. "Just thought he might want help fixing it." Ethan stared at the piece, but didn't move. The woman exhaled slowly, tension still locked in her shoulders. Somewhere behind them, children laughed near the lake fountain. A jogger passed with music leaking from cheap headphones. The whole park kept moving while the silence between the three of them somehow stayed still. Elias noticed the woman rubbing the bridge of her nose like she'd had a headache for weeks. Not hours. Weeks. Then he noticed something else. The boy never once looked at her when she spoke. Elias glanced gently toward Ethan again. "Kids get quiet when something hurts," he said. The words landed softly. No judgment in them. No pity either. Just recognition. The woman froze. Completely. Her phone screen dimmed in her hand. For a moment, she looked almost offended by how accurately a stranger had seen through her life in less than 30 seconds. Then something inside her face shifted. Not dramatic. Just tired. So unbearably tired. She looked at her son sitting beside the broken robot. Then at the lake behind Elias. Then finally at him. A small smile appeared, fragile enough to disappear if anyone touched it too hard. "No," she said quietly. "But I think I do." Claire Whitmore hated how quickly the words escaped her mouth. The moment they did, she looked away toward the lake as if she could pull them back before a stranger saw too much. The wind shifted lightly through the trees, carrying the distant squeak of swings and the soft clatter of skateboard wheels against pavement. Elias did not answer right away. That surprised her most. Most people rushed to fill silence. Most people treated vulnerability like an invitation to speak over it. But he simply stayed there beside the little boy and turned the broken robot arm carefully between his fingers. "This part still works," he said quietly to Ethan after a moment. "Means the rest probably can too." Ethan finally reached for the toy piece. Small fingers, careful movements. Claire watched her son's face tighten with concentration for the first time all week. Maybe longer. She realized suddenly she could not remember the last full conversation they had without her checking emails halfway through it. The thought sat heavy in her chest. Nearby, Naomi was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, laughing at something another little girl said. Elias glanced over instinctively. Not controlling, not nervous, just aware. Like some invisible thread always connected him to his daughter, no matter where she wandered. Claire noticed that too. "You come here often?" she asked before she could stop herself. Elias gave a small shrug. "Most evenings if my shift ends early enough." "Maintenance?" she asked, nodding toward the patch stitched onto his faded Navy uniform. "St. Anne's Medical Center." He looked down briefly as if he had forgotten he was still wearing it. "Yeah, mostly repair work. Air conditioning. Electrical. Whatever breaks first." "That sounds exhausting." "So does corporate law." Claire blinked. "How did you know?" A corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "You walk like somebody who bills by the hour." To her own surprise, Claire laughed softly. Real laughter too. Short. Rusty. Like something pulled from storage after years untouched. Ethan looked up at the sound immediately, almost startled to hear it. That hurt more than she expected. Elias noticed the boy noticing her. He said, "Nothing about it." The sunlight dipped lower now, turning the lake copper at the edges. Around them, parents gathered backpacks and called children home for dinner. One father carried a sleeping toddler against his shoulder while balancing soccer gear under his arm. Somebody's phone played old jazz music softly from a picnic blanket. Ordinary life. Warm. Slow. Claire realized she had not sat still this long in months. Maybe because stillness usually left room for thoughts she worked hard to outrun. Her phone buzzed again in her hand. 3 emails. 2 missed calls. 1 message from her assistant marked urgent. She stared at the screen without opening anything. Elias rose slowly from his crouch beside Ethan. "Try not to force the wheel," he told the boy gently. "Sometimes things hold together better when you stop pushing them so hard." Claire looked up at him sharply. The sentence hit too close to home to be accidental. But his face stayed calm. Neutral. If he meant anything deeper by it, he was not claiming credit. Naomi came jogging back then, cheeks flushed pink from running. "Daddy, can we stay 5 more minutes?" she asked. Elias checked the darkening sky. 10, he said. "But only because you hustled me at Checkers yesterday." Naomi grinned triumphantly. Claire watched the exchange quietly. No tension. No performance. Just ease. The kind built slowly over years of showing up. Ethan glanced toward Naomi, then back down at the robot in his lap. After a long hesitation, he spoke so softly Claire almost missed it. "I used to have one with lights too." Naomi immediately sat beside him on the concrete. "Mine still lights up," she whispered back. "But only if you smack it twice." Ethan stared at her. Then, very carefully, the smallest smile appeared. Claire felt something crack inside her chest. Tiny. Quiet. Dangerous. Because hope was dangerous when you had almost stopped believing in it. She looked over at Elias again. He was watching the kids now, hands resting loosely in his pockets, shoulders tired but steady beneath the fading evening light. And for reasons she could not explain yet, the park suddenly felt less lonely than it had an hour ago. The sky had turned the color of faded denim by the time Claire finally checked her phone again. 23 unread emails. 4 missed calls from the office. 1 voicemail from her ex-husband she already knew she would not listen to. The screen glowed cold against her palm. For the first time in weeks, she locked it without opening anything. Ethan and Naomi sat cross-legged near the bench now, both leaning over the half-repaired robot with the kind of concentration adults spent entire careers losing. Naomi tapped the toy twice against the concrete exactly like she promised. 1 small blue light flickered weakly near its chest panel. Ethan stared at it like he had just witnessed magic. "See?" Naomi whispered proudly. "Sometimes stuff just needs encouragement." Elias shook his head softly from nearby. "That is not how electricity works." "It worked though," Naomi argued. "That is unfortunately true." Claire smiled before she realized she was doing it. The expression felt unfamiliar on her face, like trying on clothes she used to wear years ago. She could not remember the last conversation she sat through without checking the time every 30 seconds. Yet somehow nearly an hour had passed here without her noticing. The lake breeze cooled slightly as evening settled deeper over the park. Streetlights buzzed awake one by one along the walking path. Somewhere behind them, an ice cream truck played a warped version of an old pop song that sounded tired from years on repeat. Ethan looked up suddenly. "Mom." Claire blinked at the sound of his voice. He had spoken more in the last 20 minutes than he had during most of the previous week. "Yes, sweetheart. Can we come back tomorrow?" The question hit her harder than it should have. Not because of the park. Because he sounded hopeful asking it. She opened her mouth carefully. "If I can finish work early." Ethan nodded, but the small disappointment crossed his face before he could hide it. Elias noticed. Of course he noticed. Claire was beginning to understand that he missed very little when it came to children. Naomi stood and brushed dirt from her jeans. "We come almost every day," she told Ethan casually. "My dad says parks are free therapy." Elias exhaled through his nose. "I said fresh air is free therapy." "Same thing," Naomi replied. Claire glanced sideways at him. "She always this confident?" "Unfortunately," Elias said. "Got it from me." That earned another quiet laugh from Claire. It startled her less this time. A cyclist rolled past ringing a bell softly while two teenagers jogged by carrying basketballs under their arms. The city kept moving around them in ordinary rhythms. But Claire felt strangely removed from the noise tonight, as if the pressure pressing constantly behind her ribs had loosened by half an inch. Not gone, just quieter. She watched Elias bend to zip Naomi's hoodie halfway when the breeze picked up. Automatic, gentle, no impatience in the motion. Claire suddenly remembered the last parent-teacher meeting she attended while answering emails under the table. The memory stung. "You are good with her," she said quietly before thinking better of it. Elias looked toward Naomi as she chased Ethan toward the fountain lights. "I mess up plenty." Still, he was quiet for a moment. "Kids do not really need perfect," he said finally. "They just need somebody who keeps showing up." Claire lowered her eyes. The sentence settled somewhere deep inside her chest where exhaustion lived. She thought about canceled dinners, missed school pickups, the night Ethan fell asleep waiting on the couch while she argued through speakerphone with senior partners in Chicago. She remembered carrying him to bed without waking him and realizing he had started hugging a pillow in his sleep instead of her. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Across the fountain, Naomi suddenly called out, "Dad, look." Elias turned immediately. Fully, completely. Like nothing else in the world mattered for those few seconds except whatever his daughter wanted him to see. Claire watched that more carefully than she meant to. Watched how easy his attention came. How natural. No divided focus. No constant urgency pulling him somewhere else. Just presence. Warm and steady. The kind that made children feel safe without needing words for it. Her phone buzzed again. Claire stared at the screen lighting up in her hand. Then, slowly, she powered it off completely. The silence that followed felt terrifying for about 2 seconds. Then strangely peaceful. Elias glanced at the dark screen before looking back toward the kids. He did not comment on it. Somehow that made the moment matter even more. Claire did not realize how quiet her penthouse was until she walked into it that night carrying Ethan asleep against her shoulder. The city glittered outside the 42nd floor windows in perfect silver lines. Beautiful in the same cold way museums were beautiful. Expensive. Untouchable. Still awake long after warmth had left the room. She eased Ethan carefully onto his bed, pulling the dinosaur blanket over him while his repaired robot rested against his chest. The blue light still flickered faintly every few seconds. Before leaving the room, she paused at the doorway. Ethan had fallen asleep smiling. That alone nearly undid her. In the kitchen, the microwave clock read 9:47 p.m. Her wine glass from the previous night still sat untouched beside legal documents stacked like bricks across the marble counter. Claire loosened her heels slowly and stared at the silence around her. Usually she filled nights with noise. News channels, conference calls, podcasts she barely listened to. Anything to avoid hearing her own thoughts too clearly. Tonight the apartment felt different somehow. Not less lonely exactly. Just honest about it. Her phone remained powered off inside her purse near the door. She kept glancing toward it like an addict eyeing cigarettes after trying to quit. Across town, Elias stood inside a 24-hour laundromat feeding quarters into an old dryer while Naomi sat on the folding table swinging her legs beside a half-finished math worksheet. The place smelled like detergent and overheated metal. A baseball game played silently on the mounted television while rain threatened softly against the windows outside. "You think Ethan liked the robot?" Naomi asked. Elias folded one of her hoodies carefully before answering. "I think he liked somebody sitting with him." Naomi considered that seriously. His mom looked sad. Elias glanced briefly toward the spinning dryers. "Sometimes grown-ups get tired in ways sleep does not fix." Naomi frowned slightly. "Like you." That caught him off guard for half a second. Children always notice the things adults hoped stayed hidden. Elias smiled gently anyway. "Sometimes," he admitted. Naomi hopped down from the table and wrapped her arms around his waist without warning. He rested his chin lightly on top of her curls for one quiet moment. Long day, long month, long few years if he was honest with himself. But somehow tonight felt lighter than most. Back in the penthouse, Claire stood barefoot at her bedroom window, staring down at tiny headlights moving through Manhattan traffic below. She finally powered her phone back on. Notifications exploded across the screen instantly. Emails, missed calls, calendar alerts. One message from her senior partner, marked urgent 3 separate times. Claire read half of it before locking the phone again. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark glass. Tired eyes, tight shoulders. A woman who had spent so long becoming impressive, she forgot how to become peaceful. Then unexpectedly, she thought about Elias kneeling beside Ethan on the pavement like there was nowhere else in the world he needed to be. No rush, no performance, just patience. She remembered the way he listened before speaking, the way silence around him never felt awkward. The thought stayed with her longer than she expected. The next afternoon, rain clouds rolled low over the city by 5 o'clock. Claire sat trapped in another conference room while 2 partners argued over settlement numbers neither of them actually cared about. Through the glass wall, her assistant gave her a cautious look. "Your 6:30 got moved to tomorrow," she whispered during a pause. Claire nodded automatically, but her attention drifted toward the storm outside instead. Somewhere across the table somebody said her name twice before she realized they were waiting for her response. "Sorry," she murmured. What was the question? But even as the meeting continued, her mind kept wandering back to the park bench beside the lake. To Ethan speaking more in one evening than he had all week. To a maintenance worker with tired eyes and steady hands saying kids only needed somebody who kept showing up. At 6:12, Claire closed her laptop mid-sentence. The room fell silent immediately. One of the partners blinked. "Claire." She gathered her files calmly. "Reschedule the rest," she said. "I need to leave. We are finalizing tomorrow's presentation." "Then finalize it," she replied softly. Even she looked surprised hearing herself say it. 20 minutes later, Claire stood at the park entrance again, while cool wind carried the smell of rain across the lake. For one strange nervous second, she wondered if she had imagined the entire connection from yesterday. Then she spotted Naomi first near the swings. And beside the bench, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate while dark storm clouds gathered overhead, stood Elias Brooks. The first raindrop landed on Claire's wrist just as Elias looked up from the paper cups in his hands. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition, as if some quiet part of him had expected her to come back. The wind moved harder across the lake now, bending tree branches gently, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Ethan spotted Naomi first and immediately ran toward the swings without waiting for permission. Claire noticed that too. Yesterday, he would have stayed glued to her side. Today, he moved like a child again. Small difference. Huge one. Elias lifted one of the paper cups slightly. "Hot chocolate," he said. "I gambled on the weather." Claire glanced at the dark clouds gathering overhead. "Looks like the weather is winning." "Usually does." She accepted the cup carefully. The warmth surprised her fingers. So did the smell. Cinnamon. Real chocolate. Not the powdered kind from office vending machines. "You made this?" she asked. "Naomi says the cart by the baseball field tastes like wet cardboard. She has strong opinions." "She is 8, Elias replied. "That is basically the factory setting." Claire laughed quietly again. Easier this time. Less guarded. Around them, parents hurried to collect jackets and backpacks before the storm arrived. The park slowly thinned out while the lake turned dark gray beneath the heavy sky. "Ethan." and Naomi crouched beneath the slide platform now, trying to keep the repaired robot dry while arguing over whether robots could survive lightning strikes. They definitely cannot, Elias called out. Naomi ignored him completely. Claire wrapped both hands around the warm cup. I almost did not come. Elias nodded once like he understood more than she said out loud. Work, life. He accepted that answer without pressing further. That alone made her shoulders loosen slightly. Most people asked questions because silence made them uncomfortable. Elias seemed to trust silence enough to leave it alone. Rain started falling harder then. Slow, steady drops tapping against benches and sidewalks. Naomi immediately groaned. Dad, we are not melting, Elias replied. Yet, Naomi muttered. Claire looked toward the parking lot. I should probably get Ethan home before this gets worse. But Ethan was smiling again beneath the slide platform while Naomi explained robot survival strategies with absolute confidence. Claire realized he had not smiled like that around other kids since the divorce. The realization hurt and healed something at the same time. Thunder rumbled louder overhead. Elias glanced toward a small covered picnic shelter near the lake path. There is a dry spot over there if you want to wait out the rain. Claire hesitated for half a second before nodding. The four of them crossed the wet grass together while rain darkened the shoulders of Elias's navy work jacket almost immediately. He handed his cup to Naomi so he could pull the hood of her sweatshirt tighter around her curls. Again, that same effortless attentiveness. Claire noticed herself watching for it now. Inside the picnic shelter, rain drummed softly against the metal roof while cool air swept through the open sides. Ethan sat beside Naomi on top of the wooden table bench. Both kids focused entirely on the robot's surgery happening between them. Claire stood near the railing overlooking the lake. The city skyline blurred behind sheets of rain, turning everything softer around the edges. I used to love storms, she admitted quietly after a while. Elias leaned against the opposite post holding his untouched hot chocolate. Used to. Claire stared out at the water. Now they just remind me how many things I forgot to finish. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. Storms are not deadlines. The sentence settled between them gently. Claire exhaled through a small tired laugh. You always talk like that. Like what? Like somebody who secretly reads philosophy books at 3 in the morning. Elias smiled faintly into his cup. Mostly repair manuals. Another silence followed. Comfortable this time. Rainwater slid steadily from the shelter roof in silver streams, while somewhere nearby a train horn echoed through the city. Claire watched Ethan leaning closer to Naomi while she explained something with animated hands and crooked robot parts. He has not talked this much in months, she said softly. Elias followed her gaze. Maybe he finally found kids who let him be quiet without making it weird. Claire swallowed hard at that, because suddenly she realized nobody had really done that for her either. Not coworkers, not her ex-husband, not even herself. For years, every room she entered demanded performance. Answers. Results. Perfection. But here beneath a leaking park shelter beside a tired maintenance worker and 2 children fixing broken toys, nobody seemed to need anything from her at all. And somehow that felt more frightening than pressure ever had. The rain finally slowed to a soft mist around 7:30, leaving the park washed clean and glowing under scattered streetlights. Water clung to the benches in silver beads while the smell of wet pavement drifted through the cooling evening air. Naomi and Ethan had migrated from fixing the robot to drawing shapes in the fogged picnic shelter windows with their fingertips. Every few seconds, Ethan actually laughed. Small sounds. Quick ones. But real. Claire kept noticing them the way thirsty people noticed water. Carefully. Almost afraid to trust them. Elias sat across from her now, elbows resting loosely on his knees, paper cup turning slowly between his hands. His maintenance badge caught faint light whenever cars passed along the street beyond the trees. Claire realized she still knew almost nothing about him. Yet somehow sitting beside him felt easier than sitting beside people she had worked with for 10 years. How long have you been doing hospital maintenance? She asked quietly. About 6 years. And before that? Elias leaned back slightly against the bench. Construction. HVAC work. Whatever paid enough. Claire nodded slowly. You make it sound simple. Most hard things are simple, he said. Simple does not mean easy. The sentence stayed with her for a moment. Outside the shelter, puddles reflected blurry city lights, while distant thunder drifted farther away across the river. Claire watched Naomi carefully helping Ethan tighten a loose wheel on the robot with complete seriousness. She is kind, Claire said softly. Elias followed her gaze. Pride moved across his tired face so quickly it almost disappeared before she caught it. Got lucky with her. I do not think that is luck. He glanced toward Claire then. Not intrusive, just present. Ethan seems like a good kid too. Claire lowered her eyes to the cooling hot chocolate in her hands. He used to talk more. Silence settled for a few seconds. Rainwater dripped steadily from the shelter roof nearby. The divorce hit him hard. Elias asked gently. Claire let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. The divorce. The moving. Me working all the time. She gave a humorless little smile. Pick one. Elias did not rush to comfort her. That was becoming the thing she trusted most about him. He never treated pain like a problem he needed to solve immediately. He just made room for it to exist. Claire stared out toward the dark lake. There was this night last winter, she said quietly. Ethan had a school concert. I promised him I would make it. Her voice thinned slightly at the edges now. I missed it because a client meeting ran over. Elias remained still, listening. When I got home, he was asleep on the couch wearing his little white button-up shirt. Claire swallowed hard. He left the program on the coffee table with my seat highlighted in yellow marker. The memory cracked open something raw inside her chest. She laughed once under her breath, but there was no humor in it. You know what I did? Elias shook his head slowly. I answered emails for another 2 hours sitting right beside him. Rain tapped lightly against the shelter roof again. Naomi and Ethan's voices blurred softly together in the background while the city hummed beyond the park. Elias finally spoke. You came tonight. Claire looked over at him. What? You came tonight, he repeated simply. That matters too. She stared at him for a second like she did not understand the language he was speaking. One good night does not erase 100 bad ones. No, Elias agreed quietly. But kids remember patterns. Not perfection. Claire looked away fast before emotion reached her face too clearly. Across from them, Ethan suddenly held up the robot proudly. One blue light blinked steadily now from its chest. It works, he announced. Naomi threw both hands in the air like they had repaired a spaceship. Claire smiled automatically at the sight, but something deeper shifted too. Because for the first time and longer than she wanted to admit, she wondered if maybe broken things did not always stay broken forever. Elias rose then and walked over to the kids, crouching beside them while Ethan explained every repair detail with growing excitement. Claire watched the scene quietly from the bench. The storm clouds were finally drifting apart overhead now, revealing small pieces of clear night sky between them. And sitting there beneath the fading rain beside the sound of children laughing, Claire Whitmore realized something almost frightening in its softness. She felt safe. 3 days passed before Claire saw Elias again. 3 long days of conference rooms, delayed hearings, untouched dinners, and Ethan asking every evening around 6:15, "Are we going to the park today?" The first night, she said she had too much work. The second night, rain flooded the downtown streets, and traffic barely moved. By the third night, Claire realized the excuses sounded thinner even to herself. Ethan noticed too. Thursday evening arrived wrapped in humid summer heat. The city sidewalks shimmered beneath fading sunlight while office towers reflected orange streaks across the river. Claire sat at the head of a polished conference table listening to 2 executives argue over language buried inside a merger contract neither of them had fully read. Her temples throbbed steadily. Someone across the table kept clicking a pen over and over. Click, click, click. Her phone buzzed beside her laptop. A text from the nanny. Ethan has barely touched dinner. Says his stomach hurts. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Guilt arrived instantly now, faster than exhaustion. Claire, one of the executives asked sharply, "We need your recommendation before legal signs off." She opened her mouth automatically, then stopped. Through the glass wall beside the conference room, the skyline glowed blue with early evening. 6:12 p.m. Again, the same hour she kept missing her own life. Claire pushed back her chair quietly. "Send me the revised draft," she said while gathering her files. The older executive frowned. "We are not finished here." Claire looked at him calmly for a long second. "Neither am I." 25 minutes later, she stepped out of the car near the park entrance with Ethan beside her. The air smelled like hot pavement cooling after another long day. Somewhere near the basketball courts, Teenagers shouted over music leaking from portable speakers. Ethan walked slower than usual tonight, shoulders tight beneath his hoodie despite the heat. Stomach still hurting? Claire asked gently. He shrugged without answering. The silence between them felt heavier again. Claire's chest tightened. Then Ethan suddenly pointed ahead toward the lake path. They are here. Elias sat on the same bench near the water while Naomi balanced carefully along the low stone wall beside him with both arms stretched wide like airplane wings. The sight of them hit Claire with unexpected relief. Not dramatic, just deep, like finally sitting down after standing too long. Naomi spotted Ethan first. "Robot boy," she yelled immediately. Ethan actually smiled and jogged ahead before Claire could remind him not to run near the lake. Elias rose from the bench slowly as Claire approached. "Rough day?" he asked softly. Claire let out a tired breath. "Is it that obvious?" Only to people having one. 2. For a second, they simply stood there while warm wind moved through the trees around them. Claire noticed fresh grease stains near the cuff of his work shirt and faint shadows beneath his eyes. "Long shift?" she asked. Elias nodded once. "One of the operating room cooling systems died around noon." "That sounds stressful." "Hospitals usually are." But before Claire could answer, Ethan suddenly froze near the stone wall. Completely froze. Naomi stopped talking immediately. The repaired robot slipped from Ethan's hands onto the pavement with a sharp plastic crack. A group of older boys had come down the walking path nearby, laughing loudly, while bouncing a basketball between them. Nothing threatening, just noisy. But Ethan's breathing changed instantly anyway. Fast. Shallow. His small shoulders tightened hard beneath the hoodie. Claire moved toward him quickly. "Ethan." He backed away from the sound without looking at her. "Hey, sweetheart, it is okay." But his breathing only worsened. Claire felt panic rising inside herself now too. "Ethan, look at me." He could not. His hands pressed hard over his ears while the basketball echoed against pavement nearby. Claire's pulse spiked. "Ethan." Her voice cracked this time. "Baby, please." The boys kept walking without even noticing. But Ethan was already gone somewhere deeper inside the fear. Claire dropped to her knees beside him helplessly. "I do not know what to do." The confession escaped before pride could stop it. Then suddenly Elias was there beside them. Calm. Steady. Not rushing. He crouched down slowly several feet from Ethan instead of touching him. "Hey, champ," he said gently. "Nobody is going to make you talk." Ethan's breathing stuttered unevenly. Elias glanced once toward Naomi. She immediately sat down quietly beside Claire without speaking. No panic. No chaos. Just calm spreading carefully through the moment. Elias rested his forearms loosely on his knees. "You hear that water?" he asked Ethan softly, nodding toward the lake fountain nearby. "Try listening to that instead." Ethan did not respond at first, but Elias stayed exactly where he was. Patient as stone. "You do not have to fix the feeling. Tonight," he said quietly. "Just breathe through this minute. Then the next one comes after." Claire stared at him through her own panic. The park noise blurred around her while evening light shimmered across the lake behind them. And little by little, Ethan's breathing began to slow. The change in Ethan happened slowly enough that most people in the park would never have noticed it. But Claire noticed because mothers learned to measure survival in tiny things. One breath becoming steadier. One shoulder unclenching. One trembling hand loosening from the edge of a hoodie sleeve. The fountain beside the lake continued spilling water in soft rhythmic waves while distant traffic hummed beyond the trees. Elias stayed exactly where he was on the pavement. No sudden movements. No flood of reassuring words. Just presence. Quiet and steady like an anchor dropped into rough water. "That is it," he said softly as Ethan's breathing slowed another fraction. "You are doing fine." Ethan kept his eyes lowered toward the cracked robot near his sneakers. But after another minute, he whispered something barely audible. Too loud. Claire closed her eyes briefly at the sound of his voice. Relief hit so hard it almost hurt. Elias nodded once. "Yeah," he said gently. "Sometimes the world gets loud all at once." Ethan sniffed hard and wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. Naomi stayed sitting quietly beside Claire without interrupting the moment. Even at 8 years old, she seemed to understand that some hurts needed softness more than solutions. Elias finally glanced toward the robot lying on the pavement nearby. One wheel had popped loose again during the panic. "Looks like he took another hit," Elias said lightly. Ethan looked at the toy for the first time since freezing up. "I broke it." "Nah." Elias replied calmly. Just scared him a little. Something inside Ethan relaxed at that. Tiny, but real. Claire watched the exchange with her throat tight. Because she had spent months trying to solve Ethan's silence with appointments, schedules, specialists, parenting books stacked untouched beside her bed. And somehow this man sitting cross-legged on public pavement beside a broken toy had reached her son in under 10 minutes. Not with expertise, not with pressure, just patience. The realization humbled her in ways she was not prepared for. The sky deepened toward purple overhead, while park lights flickered on one by one around the lake path. Somewhere behind them, the basketball game finally ended, and the older boys disappeared toward the subway entrance laughing about something harmless. Ethan's breathing steadied completely now. Elias rose slowly and picked up the robot from the pavement. Good news, he announced after examining it seriously. He survived. Ethan managed the faintest smile. Naomi threw both hands up dramatically. Told you robots are built for emotional hardship. Elias shook his head under his breath. I have no idea where she gets this stuff. Claire laughed softly through lingering emotion. The sound surprised even her. Elias handed the robot carefully back to Ethan before stepping aside, like the moment did not belong to him. But it did. Claire knew it did. Ethan stood quietly beside her now, one small hand gripping her sleeve for the first time in weeks. Not because he was afraid, because he wanted to stay close. Claire looked down at him and felt something inside her chest crack wide open. Not painfully this time. Honestly. Thank you, she whispered toward Elias. He shrugged gently. He did the hard part himself. Still, Elias glanced toward Ethan. Kids usually calm down faster when somebody nearby stays calm too. Claire lowered her eyes immediately because the sentence exposed more than he intended. Or maybe exactly as much as he intended. She thought about all the nights Ethan watched her pace through phone calls with tension wound tight inside her body like wire. Children absorbed storms even when adults pretended otherwise. The thought settled heavy inside her. Naomi suddenly yawned beside the bench. Dad, I am starving. That is because your stomach thinks every hour is lunchtime. That is medically accurate. Ethan looked cautiously toward Claire, then toward Naomi. Can we walk with them? The question carried hope inside it again. Claire brushed a loose strand of hair behind his ear carefully. Yeah, she answered softly. I think we can. So the four of them started down the lakeside path together beneath the glow of scattered park lights, while warm summer wind moved gently across the water. Naomi talked almost non-stop about robot survival probabilities, while Ethan listened close beside her carrying the repaired toy against his chest. Claire walked half a step behind with Elias beside her. Neither of them spoke for a while. They did not need to. Somewhere ahead of them, children laughed beneath the city lights. Somewhere behind them, another difficult day finally loosened its grip. And for the first time in longer than Claire Whitmore could remember, going home did not feel quite so heavy. By the time they reached the small diner near the edge of the park, the city had settled into that strange late evening softness New York only showed after long summer storms. Streetlights reflected off wet sidewalks in blurry gold streaks, while steam curled from subway grates into the cooling air. Inside the diner, old soul music drifted quietly from a jukebox near the counter. The smell of pancakes and fresh coffee wrapped around them the moment they stepped through the door. Naomi slid into a booth immediately like she owned the place. Fries count as vegetables if you believe in yourself, she announced seriously while reaching for a menu. Elias sighed softly. One day I am going to meet the teacher encouraging this behavior. Ethan actually laughed at that. Not the careful little smile from earlier. A real laugh. Claire froze for half a second hearing it. The sound felt almost unfamiliar now. Like hearing a song she thought she forgot. They ordered simple things. Grilled cheese for the kids. Coffee for Claire. Pancakes for Naomi despite Elias pretending to object. The waitress knew Elias by name. Claire noticed that too. The easy familiarity. The quiet respect in the woman's voice when she called him honey and asked if Naomi still liked extra strawberries. Elias belonged places. Maybe not expensive places, but real ones. Warm ones. While the kids colored paper placemats beside the window, Claire sat across from Elias, turning the coffee mug slowly between her palms. The diner lights softened the tired lines near his eyes. For the first time she noticed how exhaustion lived in him too. Just differently. Less sharp. Less defended. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Elias nodded once. Claire looked toward Ethan before speaking. How did you know what to do back there? Elias followed her gaze toward the kids. Ethan was showing Naomi how the robot will finally turn properly now. I did not, he admitted softly. Claire frowned slightly. It did not seem that way. He rested one arm along the back of the booth. After Naomi's mom passed, she stopped talking much for a while too. The words landed gently between them. No drama attached. Just truth. Claire looked at him carefully then. I am sorry. Elias gave a small shrug. Long time ago. But grief still moved quietly through his voice anyway. Some losses never fully left people. They just learned how to carry them better. Claire lowered her eyes to the coffee again. I think I forgot how to slow down after my divorce, she admitted. Everything became schedules and deadlines, and trying not to fall behind. Outside the diner window, rainwater slid slowly down the glass while taxis rolled through intersections below glowing traffic lights. Elias listened without interrupting. Claire swallowed once before continuing. Somewhere in all of it, Ethan stopped talking to me the way he used to. Her voice thinned slightly. And honestly, I do not know when I stopped talking to myself too. Silence settled across the booth for a moment. Not empty. Thoughtful. Elias finally looked at her fully. You know what kids notice most? Claire shook her head slightly. Who feels safe? He answered quietly. Not rich. Not impressive. Safe. The sentence hit her harder than any courtroom argument ever had. Because deep down Claire knew exactly how long it had been since she herself felt safe anywhere. The waitress arrived balancing plates while Naomi immediately reached for syrup with dangerous enthusiasm. Ethan started explaining robot repairs again between bites of grilled cheese, and this time Claire listened to every word. Really listened. No phone in her hand. No drifting. Attention. Just her son's voice filling the small booth beneath warm diner lights. Halfway through the story, Ethan leaned casually against her shoulder without thinking about it. Claire nearly broke apart from the softness of that simple trust returning. Later, outside the diner, the city air smelled like rain and asphalt and distant food carts closing for the night. Naomi hugged Ethan goodbye beside the sidewalk while Elias searched his pockets for train cards. Claire stood quietly beside him, watching the children one last time under the streetlights. Thank you, she said again. Elias looked over. For what? Claire smiled faintly. Tired still, but lighter now. For reminding us how to breathe a little slower. Elias glanced toward the kids before answering. Sometimes people do not need someone to fix their life. His voice stayed calm beneath the noise of passing traffic. Sometimes they just need somebody willing to sit beside them while they figure it out. Claire looked at him for a long moment after that. Then toward Ethan laughing softly beside Naomi beneath the glow of the city lights. And somewhere between the storm, the park bench, the broken robot, and the quiet kindness of a man who never tried to rescue anyone,